Credit bureaus may be viewed by some as highly intrusive, but by those who pay their bills on time, a veritable savior when they need loans. There's no doubt that the advent of credit bureaus is likely to pave the way to better credit access for bill-paying individuals and businesses who are likely to get the prime lending rates from their financial institutions. Simply put, financial institutions tend to offer better rates to those who historically honor their commitments. Credit bureaus will be entrusted with the enormous responsibility of holding your confidential financial information. So I visited the regulator's office at the Bank of Jamaica on March 13, essentially to examine the selection process and the types of fail-safe measures to prevent credit bureaus from selling or leaking your private information without your consent. I'm with Mrs. Gayon Hosin, the chief regulator in the credit reporting regime. It's something new to the Jamaican public. Well, not so new, but it's worthwhile to hear about the credit reporting regime certainly from the vantage point of the regulator. Welcome, Mrs. Hosin.
Thank you.
What's the role of the regulator in this credit bureau scenario, and why is it necessary to have a regulator such as the Bank of Jamaica?
Well, firstly, the Jamaican lawmakers determined that there was need for a regulator of credit bureaus in Jamaica, primarily because credit bureaus will have access to person's most confidential financial information, and therefore correctly they took the view that the persons who are going to have that type of access and privilege should be equally fit and proper as are the bankers who have responsibility for for dealing with people's money. Why Bank of Jamaica? That's a good question. It didn't start out being Bank of Jamaica, but a couple of years ago, just before the legislation was passed in the House, the decision was taken that because the Bank of Jamaica is the supervisor of deposit-taking institutions, it would be a good fit for the Bank of Jamaica to also be the regulator of the credit bureau. Why should a credit bureau be regulated, or how do we regulate? Basically, in regulating a credit bureau, we will look at, we will do on-site examinations of that credit bureau. Even before we get to on-site examinations, we'll assess applications in terms of the persons who want to be credit bureaus in Jamaica. And we will assess the systems that are in place. We are able to issue directions if needs be. We also handle escalation of complaints with regard to credit bureaus. There's a whole regime for dealing with complaints, but the bank has a high-level role in that regard.
Since credit bureaus are going to be quite customer-centric, one question that keeps cropping up, questions directed at me as a journalist, is how safe will my information be with these credit bureaus?
Your information will be as safe as it is with the banks. The credit bureaus will be subject to the same confidentiality constraints as our banks, and while they will be able to receive all the information from banks and other credit information providers under the Credit Reporting Act, they will not be able to disseminate that information in the form of a credit report without the consumer's permission.
Okay, let me get it correctly. The banks have customers. The banks under the new Credit Bureau Act or regime, they are able to disseminate this information to the credit bureaus without the customer's consent?
Right.
But
not only the banks, all the credit information providers. So it's banks, building societies, merchant banks, other financial institutions or lenders, Students Loan Bureau, the NHT, others like that.
However, the caveat here is that those institutions cannot use the information without the consent of the customer.
Right. The credit bureau itself will release the information. The law provides for the credit bureau to release the information only on the consent of the customer. And there will be systems in place to ensure that that consent is in place for the release of the information.
On March 5, the Minister of Finance revealed that Megan Dean's Credit Info Jamaica Limited was granted approval to operate Jamaica's first credit bureau. I asked Deputy Bank of Jamaica Governor Mrs. Gayon Hosin how thorough the regulatory process was.
The regulatory process has taken us almost 12 months since the first application. Not all applications came in 12 months ago. The pace of the assessment has proceeded at the pace of the submissions we have received. Under the Credit Reporting Act, under the application requirements, there's certain information. We get an application, we assess. We took the approach that because this was a new area altogether, we wouldn't refuse an application on the grounds that it was incomplete. The process we adopted was to advise that we have received information is incomplete as to these particular areas, or information is inconsistent as to these particular areas. So it was a pretty iterative process until we all got it right. All our applicants got it right. So now we are in the rollout stage. It has involved a tremendous dedication of resources, including our IT oversight resources and so on, building the processes. But we have a strong team. Not a lot of people, but a strong team.
Robin Sykes is the Bank of Jamaica's General Counsel, and he plays an integral role in the due diligence process in the selection of credit bureaus. I spoke with him on the question of trust between the customer and credit bureaus. Now, Robin, the credit bureaus will be handling highly sensitive information from customers. Information which in today's sophisticated fraud era will be valuable to anyone who is unscrupulous. Now, what level of risk-based supervision will you, the regulator, be providing to allay the fears of customers? Because already this is one of the questions the average person out there is asking.
Customers can be assured that the bank is going to apply a stringent level of supervision. There is already in the law quite a robust reporting regime. So the bank will be constantly receiving data from credit bureaus as to their operations. The bank also has powers to conduct audits and inspections of credit bureaus, which it will do on a periodic or ad hoc basis. So these measures will test the systems of credit bureaus. On our risk-based system, the regulators also will be watching market developments. We'll be looking at levels of complaints, and these will indicate areas of risk that the supervisor needs to focus on. So in that respect, these will be indicators where a spike in complaints could point to a credit bureau that's not living up to its statutory obligations. And that will be clearly an area of focus for the supervisor's attention.
As well as it could be guerrilla tactics by a competitor.
Well, these are areas that the supervisor has to get to the bottom of. The primacy is, of course, the consumer. So therefore, once there's a consumer complaint there, we will be obliged to try to get to the bottom of it. Consumers, of course, should take their complaint first to the credit bureau. And if there is no satisfaction there, it is brought to the supervisor's attention. Even at that level, if there is a difficulty with the decision of a supervisor and the customer still feels aggrieved, there is also an additional appeals process.
And would that appeals process involve the regulator, you the regulator?
Well, it is really an appeal from a regulatory decision. So if a customer
Okay.
has a complaint against a credit bureau
Yes.
and it's not resolved at that level, and it's not resolved at the level of the supervisor, it can go beyond to the appeals tribunal.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Good.